You might want to read page 3 before you finish that sentence. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It slid out steady, almost too quiet for the weight it carried. Victor froze, the edges of his smirk faltering as he stood behind his father's old mahogany desk. His hand, still gripping the will, paused midair. The late afternoon light spilling through the tall windows sliced across his face, sharp enough to catch every twitch. This might sound like just a story, but for many, it's real life. If you've ever gone through something similar, feel free to share, or simply comment 1 so others know they're not alone. The study smelled the way it always had: old leather, cedar polish, and the faint tang of cigar smoke that had seeped into the rug decades ago. Outside, the winter wind rattled the bare branches against the glass, but in here, the air felt still, heavy. Trish, in her silk blouse and that ever-present expression of polite disdain, leaned against the doorframe. She had one ankle crossed over the other, like she'd been rehearsing this moment for months. The corners of her mouth curled. "Margaret, it's not personal," she said, tilting her head in mock sympathy. "It's just what Charles wanted. You've had a good run here, but this house, this estate, it's been in the Moore family for generations." I looked at her for a moment, then back to Victor. He cleared his throat, his voice taking on that slow, deliberate tone people use when they think they're explaining something to a child. "My father's will leaves the property entirely to me, which means, of course, you'll need to make arrangements to move out. We'll give you 60 days. The way he said, "move out," as if I were a tenant who'd overstayed my welcome, settled into my chest like a stone. I didn't answer right away. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single manila envelope. It wasn't thick, just a few pages inside, but the weight of it had kept me steady for weeks. I laid it gently on the desk, sliding it across the dark wood until it rested in front of him. "That's why," I said softly, "you should read page 3 before you finish that sentence." The clock on the mantel ticked once, twice. Victor didn't touch the envelope. He glanced at Trish, a quick exchange passing between them like static. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I'm not sure what game you think you're playing," he muttered, trying to sound bored, but I saw the faintest pulse jump in his jaw. "No game," I said, "just the truth." For a long moment, none of us moved. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight between us. My hand rested on the edge of the desk, fingers brushing the carved groove I'd polished hundreds of times over the years. Behind Victor, on the wall, hung the oil portrait of Charles, stern, composed, the family patriarch immortalized in navy and gold. His eyes seemed to follow me. Even now, though, I no longer felt the familiar tug of guilt under that gaze. Not anymore. I let the silence stretch, felt it tighten the air until even the ticking clock sounded too loud. I wanted them to sit in it, to feel the gap between what they thought they knew and what was about to come crashing through that certainty. Victor finally placed the will down on the desk, his fingers hovering over the envelope. "Fine," he said, with the kind of sigh meant to signal that he was humoring me. And that's when I noticed Trish's eyes, no longer bored, but watchful. She'd caught it too. The way my voice hadn't wavered, the way I didn't look away. I stepped back, just far enough to lean lightly against the arm of the leather chair behind me. My palms were warm, but my voice stayed cool. "Go ahead," I said. "Read it." He didn't. Not yet. Maybe he thought a delay would rattle me. Maybe he wanted to assert control by deciding when the moment would happen. But I didn't mind the wait, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one waiting in fear of what someone else might say. I let my gaze drift out the window, past the skeletal trees swaying in the wind. Somewhere beyond them, the long gravel drive curved toward the gate, the same drive I'd walked 1,000 times carrying groceries, hauling holiday decorations, waving to delivery drivers who never quite knew who I was in this house. Now the roles were shifting. They just didn't know it yet. I looked back at Victor and Trish, both standing so sure of their positions, one with his hand on a document he thought sealed my fate, the other wearing the quiet confidence of someone who believes the fight is already over. But they were standing on a fault line, and I was the only one who knew it. The envelope sat between us, small and unassuming, yet everything that mattered now lived inside it. I straightened, my voice even quieter than before, so they had to lean in to catch it. "Page 3, I said, "changes everything." And with that, I turned toward the door, leaving them in the thick, unmoving air of the study. Because sometimes you don't need to watch the first crack appear. You just need to know you've planted it. When I first married Charles, I thought I understood what it meant to build a life with someone. It was 25 years ago, and I was 37, a high school English teacher with a little apartment in town, a love for the smell of new books, and a stubborn streak my friends like to call New England grit. Charles was a widower, 12 years older, a man who carried himself like someone used to being listened to. He had a way of talking that made you feel like you'd stepped into a story, full of little details about his travels, the family estate, his late wife's green thumb. When we married, I moved into that estate. It wasn't just a house. It was a place thick with history. Walnut banisters worn smooth by generations of hands, portraits in heavy frames watching over the halls, a dining room table long enough to seat 20 if you brought out the extra leaves. The first time I stepped inside, I remember trailing my hand along the paneled walls, half in awe, half in the quiet awareness that nothing in this space had ever been chosen by me. Victor was 17 then, tall, polite, in that distant way teenagers can be, like he was humoring me. He never called me Mom, not once. Margaret was as close as he got, and even then it felt like the name had to pass through a filter before it reached me. I told myself time would soften things. When Charles had his first heart surgery, I took an extended leave from work to be home for him. I learned how to change bandages, manage his meds, and cook low-sodium meals. The months stretched into years. Eventually, I resigned from teaching altogether. We fell into a rhythm: early morning coffee on the back porch, afternoons in the garden when his energy allowed, evenings watching the news while I folded laundry. My paycheck was gone, but I told myself the trade-off was worth it, that being here, keeping him well, was my purpose now. And yet there were moments that felt like tiny splinters working their way under the skin. Like the first Easter I hosted. Baked ham, deviled eggs, lemon meringue pie. Every flower on the table cut fresh from the garden. Victor arrived late, kissed his father on the cheek, and gave me a nod before heading straight to the den to watch the game. Trish wasn't in the picture yet, but his then-girlfriend looked around and said, "Oh, you've kept it just like his mother did." Just like his mother. I smiled, because that's what you do when you're the newcomer in someone else's story. Over time, the estate became less of a home and more of a job site. Charles went through 2 strokes, 1 mild heart attack, and a knee replacement. I was the one driving to cardiology appointments, sleeping upright in hospital chairs, navigating insurance calls. I managed the bills, oversaw roof repairs, and even took over the vegetable garden when Charles could no longer bend without pain. We had Sunday dinners almost every week, roast chicken or pot roast in the winter, ribs or grilled salmon in the summer. Sometimes Victor came. Sometimes he didn't. It was at one of those dinners, years later, that he brought Trish. Tall, sharp-featured, with a designer bag looped casually over her chair, she greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was charming to Charles, deferential even. To me, she was polite. But her gaze slid past me in conversation, as if I were part of the furniture. She had a way of speaking about the estate that was careful but possessive. When we update the kitchen, or this yard will be perfect for the kids someday. She never said if, always when. Charles seemed to like her. Victor lit up around her in a way I'd rarely seen. And so I did what I'd always done. I made space. The years passed. My world grew smaller, not by choice but by necessity. Charles' health meant we traveled less, entertained less. My friendships thinned, my days absorbed by lists and routines. Early mornings at the pharmacy, afternoons checking the gutters before a storm, nights making sure the house was locked tight before bed. I never resented caring for him. But sometimes, when I stood at the kitchen sink after dinner, looking out over the darkened yard, I'd feel an ache that had nothing to do with my back. It was the quiet kind of loneliness, one that doesn't shout but hums low, steady, reminding you of all the rooms in your life that used to be full. One afternoon, must have been about 10 years into our marriage, I went to pay the property tax at the county office. Charles was recovering from a procedure, so I took the paperwork myself. The clerk, a cheerful woman in her 50s, glanced at the file and said, "Everything's in order, Mrs. Moore. We've got you listed as co-owner here." I remember pausing. "Co-owner?" She nodded, tapping the screen. "Yes, Charles Moore and Margaret Moore. Tenants by the entirety." She smiled like she'd just paid me a compliment. I signed the forms and left, the phrase looping in my mind like a song I couldn't place. At the time, I didn't think to ask Charles about it. There was dinner to make, laundry to fold, meds to set out. Life pressed forward, and that small detail slipped quietly into the background. Now, looking back, I can see it was the first seed. In the years that followed, Victor visited more often, usually alone, sometimes with Trish. Their tone with me shifted almost imperceptibly. Fewer thank yous, more sidelong comments about keeping up with repairs and the family's legacy. One summer evening, after a long day of tending the garden and cooking for a dinner that only Charles and I ended up eating, I stepped out onto the back porch with a glass of iced tea. The sun was low, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle. Charles was inside, dozing in his chair. Through the open kitchen window, I heard Victor's voice from the den, speaking low but clear enough to carry, "She's comfortable enough. We just need to make sure the paperwork's clean when the time comes." I stayed still, one hand resting on the porch railing. The cicadas droned on, but inside me, something went quiet. I didn't ask what he meant. I'd learned by then that certain truths reveal themselves whether you chase them or not. That night, after Charles had gone to bed, I walked down the hall past the study. The door was closed, but I could picture the desk inside, the drawers where he kept files so neatly labeled, and for the first time in 25 years, I wondered what was written there, and where my name might appear, if at all. By morning, I had decided I would open the desk, not to start a war, just to end the guessing game that had been living under my skin. I made Charles oatmeal and set out his pills the way the home nurse had taught me, lined up by color, the little white one balanced like a snowflake on the folded napkin. He thanked me without looking up from the morning news. It was nothing new, that small omission, but it landed differently now, like a quiet knock you can't unhear. When he dozed in his chair, I walked down the hallway toward the study. The door stuck in winter, the wood swollen with old air. I turned the brass handle and eased it open. The smell of cedar cleaner and paper rose to meet me. On the desk, the leather blotter, pen set, the antique letter opener shaped like a leaf, everything in its place. The bottom right drawer was always locked. I checked the small porcelain bowl on the credenza where Charles kept odds and ends. Nickels, cufflinks, a lone screw, no key. In the top drawer, under the stationery, I found only envelopes, stamps, a dried sprig of lavender I'd tucked there years ago to make the wood smell kind. I closed the drawers and stood still. The clock on the wall ticked with the slow patience of a grandfather. Through the window, a gust shivered the bare oaks and sent a scatter of last year's leaves skating across the flagstone path. No key today, but the wanting had woken and it would not go back to sleep. That afternoon, Victor called. He never asked, "How are you?" He got to the point. "Trish booked a dinner next Saturday. Some friends. She wants to talk about upgrades. Kitchen, landscaping, to modernize. You'll be here?" "I live here, Victor," I said, gentler than I felt. "Good," he replied. "You always do the roast well, maybe two, and that chocolate cake you do with the coffee frosting." He didn't say please. He didn't offer to bring anything. The call ended with the small click of a man satisfied that a task had been delegated. Saturday arrived gray and damp, the kind of February that settles into your bones. I set the table with the china his mother loved and polished the flatware until my shoulders ached. Trish and Victor came early, not to help, but to walk the space. She trailed her fingers along the kitchen cabinets and frowned the way people do when they're imagining how they'll change you. "This island would look amazing in quartz," she said to Victor, not me. "And we could knock out this wall to open the sight line. It'll feel more ours." Ours. I kept basting the roast. The oven light turned the meat amber, the kind of color that used to make me proud on Sunday nights. Guests trickled in wearing wool coats and wide smiles. I poured wine, answered the door, kept the appetizers moving. In the living room, the talk broke into pockets. Vacations, schools, the market. I heard my name a few times, soft and functional, like, "Margaret, more napkins?" Or, "Margaret, can you, I was everyone's hostess and no one's person. In the powder room line, I overheard Trish with a woman I didn't recognize. Their voices low, but not low enough. "She's basically the live-in help with a marriage certificate," Trish said, a little laugh tucked inside the words. "I mean, she likes it this way. Some women do." The laugh folded into the wallpaper like steam. I stood there with the extra towels in my arms and felt a heat that was not anger so much as shame. Shame that I had made it so easy to be misunderstood. I put the towels away and counted to 10 by toes, the way I used to teach jittery students before exams. At dinner, Charles was bright, buoyed by company. He told 2 old stories I'd heard 100 times and left out the parts where I had driven or waited or paid. When the plates were cleared, he tapped a spoon against his glass. "A toast," he said, smiling wide, "to family, past and future. The house will always belong to the Moores. Blood family only." He looked at Victor when he said it. The room hummed with approval. My smile must have looked right because no one noticed it didn't reach my eyes. After coffee, Trish announced a photo. "Let's get one of the family by the fireplace." She touched my elbow, light as lint. "Would you mind taking it, Margaret? You have such a steady hand." For a second, I saw the evening from above, how easily I stepped into the role handed to me. The camera felt heavier than it should have. I lined up the shot. Charles in his wingback chair, Victor behind him, Trish at his side, her hand on Victor's arm like punctuation. "Ready?" I asked. The word tasted like chalk. I pressed the button. The flash popped. I took a second for safety. "Perfect," Trish said, already turning away. In the kitchen, I wrapped the leftover roast and scraped plates in a sink already full. Victor slipped in behind me, phone in hand. "Hey, when you get a minute, can you email me those photos? Dad wants to replace the one in his study." I set a plate down a little too carefully. I wasn't in it. He looked up, blinked, and then smiled like he'd forgotten something trivial. "Oh, right, we'll do one with you next time." Next time. It sounded like the easiest promise in the world. I nodded and kept scraping. The guests left on waves of cologne and polite embraces, the way good coats leave your arms feeling cold after they're gone. Charles went to bed early, the weight of his good mood tugged quiet by fatigue. I rinsed the last wine glass and left it upside down on a towel, the circle of water beneath it like a halo. The house settled. The heater clicked. Distant, the grandfather clock began its long climb toward midnight. I stood at the edge of the dining room where lamplight fell in soft pools and realized I was waiting for something. Permission, maybe. Or the absence of witnesses. I walked down the hallway to the study again. This time, the door didn't resist. I slipped inside, turning on the lamp by the sofa, not the overhead. The shadows kept their corners. I pulled open the top left drawer, stationery. Second drawer, manuals, a passport, a plastic bag of old keys that didn't fit anything I recognized. On the shelf above the desk sat the leather-bound family Bible used for births and deaths and show. I lifted it to dust beneath it and felt a small tap against the wood. A brass key slid out from the spine, thin as a secret. My pulse tripped. I turned the key in the bottom right drawer. It gave with a soft animal sigh. Inside, file folders labeled in Charles' careful hand: insurance, taxes, maintenance, will. I hesitated, fingers hovering over will, then moved one folder left: property. My hands knew before my mind did. I pulled the file out and set it on the desk. There were deeds, surveyor maps with neat black lines and, tucked at the back, a sealed envelope, heavy papered, the old kind that belonged to handwriting and slower lives. The label read, in Charles's fountain pen blue, property transfer, 1999. My name was under his. Both our signatures on the flap. I didn't open it. Not yet. The house seemed to lean in, the very air aware. I slid the envelope back into the file and returned the key to the Bible's spine as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Even the lamplight felt different. The next week moved fast in that slow way grief moves through a bone, barely visible, deeply felt. Victor came by with a binder he never let out of his hands. He and Charles met in the study with the door closed for an hour while I baked a casserole I no longer had the appetite to eat. When they emerged, Victor looked satisfied. Charles looked tired but pleased with himself. At dinner, I tried. "We should talk about the house," I said softly, setting a dish down. Charles' fork paused. "We've talked," he said, not looking at me. "It will stay in the family, Margaret." Then, with a slice of the knife through roast chicken, he added, "Blood family." The knife blade flashed in the chandelier light. I heard it more than saw it. Something quiet split, the way wood opens under invisible pressure. "I am family," I said, not loud. He set the knife down and finally looked at me. His face was kind enough, but his eyes had that faraway focus men use when they've decided a thing. "You're my wife," he said. "You've been a comfort, but a Moore house should carry more blood." Comfort. The word rang like a lid on a pot. "Understood," I said, though nothing in me understood. I cleared the plates that were barely touched and wrapped the leftovers in foil like bandages. 2 nights later, Victor and Trish hosted a small cocktail hour in our living room for their friends from the firm. I wore the blue dress Charles liked and stood near the fireplace, smiling at the right times. While the conversation swirled around market trends and school districts like weather I couldn't change, a junior partner lifted his glass toward Charles. "To legacy," he said. "Some things you just can't put a price on." Trish slid her arm through Victor's and kissed his cheek. "We'll take good care of it," she said, loud enough for the room. "We've already started planning." Her eyes flicked to me with a sweetness that tasted metallic. It was a small thing, so small anyone else might have missed it. But I felt the room tilt a degree. Plans, already started. When the last guest left, Trish leaned back in, hand on my forearm, her perfume a little too green. "Thank you, Margaret. Everything was perfect. You always make it feel like home." I watched them cross the gravel to their car under the porch light I had replaced myself. The taillights bled red against the hedges, then disappeared. The house went still. I walked to the study, the key warm in my palm, and opened the drawer as if I were lifting the lid on a sleeping thing. I took the envelope out this time and held it up to the lamp. The paper glowed, thick and toothy, the way wedding invitations used to feel in the hand. I slid a fingernail beneath the flap where 2 signatures met, mine and his, inked together like a promise. From the hallway behind me, the grandfather clock began to strike the hour, 1, 2, 3. Each chime, a reminder that time will tell the truth, whether you're ready or not. I drew a breath and opened the envelope. The first line I read made my hands go cold, and in that instant I understood why Trish had laughed the way she did, why Victor had sounded so sure. They weren't just counting me out. They had no idea what I was holding. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Inside, a single document rested against the thick paper walls, crisp, slightly yellowed, folded once down the middle. I laid it on the desk and smoothed it open with both hands. At the top, in bold black type, quitclaim deed. Below that, Charles' name. My name, dated 1999, just 6 months after we were married. The description matched the estate: acreage, boundaries, the surveyor's coordinates. The last line read, grantees, as tenants by the entirety, hold full and undivided interest in the property. Tenants by the entirety. I'd heard it once, years ago, from that smiling clerk at the county office. But seeing it here, in legal ink with both our signatures, was something else entirely. And beneath that, the notary's seal, pressed so deep it left a faint ring on the back of the page. My heart didn't race. It slowed. A strange calm spread through me like water finding its level. I had thought I was standing on borrowed ground all these years. But it was mine. Ours legally, yes. But in the event of Charles' death, mine alone. No will could override it. No blood family-only speech could erase it. I slid the deed back into the envelope, locked it in the drawer, and replaced the key in the Bible's spine. That night, I slept with my hands folded loosely on my stomach, staring at the dark ceiling until I drifted off. Not with peace exactly, but with a sense of preparation. The next morning, I called Linda. She answered in her usual brisk tone. "Margaret, been too long. I need your eyes on something," I said, "and your discretion." An hour later, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, glasses perched low on her nose, the deed laid out between us. She read in silence, then let out a small, low whistle. Well, well. What exactly does it mean? I asked, even though I was starting to understand. "It means," she said, tapping the seal, "you and Charles own this place together. As tenants by the entirety, his share passes automatically to you upon his death. No probate, no will, nothing. The will could say, this house goes to the Queen of England, and it wouldn't matter. So when Victor..." She cut me off with a wry smile. "Victor can huff and puff, but unless he plans on building himself a house of straw, he's out." The air in the kitchen seemed to shift. "What should I do?" I asked. Linda leaned back. "First, put this somewhere safe. Second, get it on record at the county clerk's office so there's no funny business later. And third..." She paused, eyes narrowing. "Say nothing. Let them think you're still the live-in help with a marriage certificate. It'll make the reveal that much cleaner." The corner of my mouth lifted before I could stop it. By the end of the week, the deed was in a safe deposit box at the bank, and a certified copy was filed at the clerk's office. My name, Margaret. Moore now appeared, publicly and officially, as sole owner in the event of Charles' passing, and so I waited. 2 weeks later, Charles was gone. It was quiet in his sleep. The doctor called it merciful. I arranged the service, the flowers, the reception afterward in the dining room. I stood beside Victor as people offered condolences, as Trish dabbed her eyes with the edge of a silk scarf. If Victor noticed the absence of grief in my posture, he didn't say. He had his own performance to give, comforting distant cousins, making small talk with the pastor, greeting the lawyer. The very next morning, my phone rang. Victor's voice was all business. "We should meet to go over Dad's will. Trish and I can come to the study tonight, say 8. 8 o'clock sharp, they arrived. Trish wore a fitted black dress, the kind that says morning but photographs well. Victor carried a leather folio. He moved around the desk like he'd been practicing. I sat in the wing-back chair opposite him, hands folded in my lap, the same way I had sat across from doctors and lawyers for decades. Victor cleared his throat, opened the folio, and began to read. The will left a small sum to a local charity, a few heirlooms to distant relatives. The house, the estate, went entirely to him. And so, he concluded, you'll need to vacate within 60 days. I can give you a list of moving companies we've used before. Trish chimed in smoothly. We'll be respectful of your things, of course. Anything of sentimental value you can take with you. Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes were already measuring curtains. I let a beat pass. 2. The grandfather clock ticked behind me. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out the manila envelope, and set it gently on the desk. You might want to read page 3 before you finish that sentence, I said, my voice low but clear. Victor frowned. What is this? Just read it. He slid the deed out, scanned the first few lines. His brow furrowed. He read further. His hand dropped slightly, the paper trembling just enough to notice. Trish leaned over his shoulder. What's tenants by the entirety? It means, I said, that this house passed to me the moment Charles died, automatically. The will doesn't apply to jointly held property. That's ridiculous, Trish said, but her voice had lost its polish. Victor looked up, eyes hard. Where did you get this? From Charles' desk. Where he put it. Where we both signed it 25 years ago. The silence that followed had weight. I've already filed it with the county, I continued, keeping my tone even. It's a matter of public record, which means you have 30 days to remove any of your personal belongings from the property. Victor's jaw worked. You can't just... I can, I said, leaning forward just slightly. And I have. Trish's cheeks flushed. After everything, after all Charles wanted... After everything I did for this house, I interrupted. Every bill paid on time, every repair overseen, every holiday meal served here while you decided if you could be bothered to show up. Charles may have wanted this to stay in the Moore family. Lucky for you, I'm still a Moore. For the first time all night, neither of them had an answer. Victor set the deed back on the desk like it might burn him. His face had gone a dull, mottled red. This isn't over, he said. It is, I replied. You just don't like how it ended. I rose from the chair, the envelope tucked back into my bag. My steps were measured, but my pulse thudded in my ears. At the door, I turned. You have 30 days. I'll send the notice in writing tomorrow. And then I walked out, leaving them in the stillness of the study, the tick of the clock filling the space where their certainty had been. That night, in my own bed, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. The air felt different. I thought it might be relief, but it was sharper than that. It was reclamation. I had been the caretaker, the background figure, the one who kept the lights on and the garden alive, while everyone else decided what my place should be. But in that moment, in the soft dark of my room, the house quiet, except for the groan of old wood, I knew this was my place, my home, and no one could take it from me now. For the first time in 25 years, I woke the next morning without wondering what they might do next. Instead, I wondered how I'd spend the day in a house that was finally, indisputably, mine. Victor didn't storm out that night. He gathered his papers with a precision that told me he was buying time, trying to fit this new reality into the neat box he thought he controlled. Trish's heels clicked sharply on the hardwood as she followed him, her perfume hanging in the air a beat too long. I locked the study door behind them, not to keep them out, just to keep in the quiet. The next morning, I typed up the formal 30-day notice and sent it by certified mail, just as Linda had advised. The language was clinical, stripped of emotion. It didn't need drama. The law was already on my side. For the first week, I heard nothing. No calls, no visits, only the muffled echo of my own footsteps through the halls. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I found Victor in the driveway when I returned from the grocery store. His car was idling, a cardboard box in the trunk. He leaned against the bumper, arms folded, eyes shadowed. "I talked to a lawyer," he said without preamble. "She confirmed what you said about the deed." I set the grocery bags down on the steps. "Then you know there's nothing more to discuss." He stared at the gravel, his jaw tight. "Dad never told me about this. He told me—" He cut himself off, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter now, I guess." "It matters," I said quietly, "but maybe not in the way you think." For a second, I thought he might apologize, but the moment passed and he pushed himself upright. "We'll be out by the end of the month." He drove off without another word. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw them in pieces. Victor carrying framed photos, Trish sweeping past me with garment bags. They were polite, if distant, as if the house itself had taken my side and they no longer knew how to move inside it. One afternoon, I found Trish in the garden, standing where the hydrangeas were beginning to bud. She turned when she heard me, her expression guarded. "You've kept it beautiful," she said. "I tried," I replied, glancing at the row of rose bushes I'd planted the summer after Charles's second stroke. She hesitated, then looked down at her shoes. "I didn't mean, back then, to—" Her voice trailed off, the unfinished thought left hanging like laundry on a line. "I know," I said, and I did. Words can cut, even when they're meant as armor. She nodded once, and we left it there. The last Saturday of the month came with a soft rain that left the air smelling of wet earth and lilacs. I was in the kitchen kneading dough for bread when I heard the sound of a drawer sliding shut upstairs. I went up and found Victor in the study, looking at the portrait of Charles that still hung over the desk. He held a small wooden box I'd never seen him open before. "This was his," he said. "He kept old letters in it." I nodded. "You should take it." He looked surprised. "It's not in the will. I figured you'd—" "I don't need a list to tell me what belongs with you," I said. "Some things aren't about paperwork." For the first time in years, his face softened. "You're not what I thought you were," he murmured. "I hope none of us are," I said, and stepped back so he could pass. By late afternoon, the cars were gone. The house was still, the way it always is after company leaves. Air settling into the corners, floors remembering their quiet. I walked through each room slowly. In the dining room, the table gleamed in the dim light. In the parlor, the rug looked darker without the afternoon sun on it. Upstairs, the guest room smelled faintly of fresh paint from last summer. When I reached the study, I paused at the desk. The manila envelope still lay in my safe deposit box, but the copy I'd filed was public record now. I opened the top drawer and took out Charles' fountain pen, the one he'd used to sign the deed. The ink had long since dried in it, but it still fit my hand as if it belonged there. I set it back gently, closed the drawer, and stood for a moment in the center of the room. I could have replaced the portrait above the desk. I could have taken it down entirely. But instead, I stepped closer, reached up, and straightened the frame. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't nostalgia. It was acknowledgement that the past was real, but it no longer dictated my place here. As the rain eased, I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The gravel drive was slick and glistening, each stone reflecting a little shard of gray sky. Beyond the gate, the lilacs bent under the weight of the water, their scent drifting up the path. I stood there for a long time, hands resting lightly on the railing. The house was mine. Not because it had been handed to me, but because I had claimed it quietly and completely. And in the hush that followed, I realized I didn't need to win anything more. I turned, walked back inside, and locked the front door, not to keep anyone out, but to remind myself with a final click of the latch that I was home. The first week after they left, the house felt almost too quiet. Not the tense, brittle quiet it had carried for years, but something lighter, like the air after a storm, when the wind finally stops and you can hear the small things again, the tick of the hallway clock, the creak of a stair under your own weight. I started in the kitchen, pulling open drawers and cupboards, sorting through decades of collected things. Some I kept, like the heavy cast-iron skillet that had cooked hundreds of Sunday breakfasts. Others went straight into a box for donation. There was relief in letting go of what no longer served me. By the end of that first month, the house had begun to change. I painted the dining room a soft, warm cream. I took down the heavy drapes in the living room and let the afternoon light pour through sheer linen. Charles's study, once a place where I'd tread lightly, became my own reading lounge. I moved in a worn leather chair from the attic, set up a small writing desk by the window, and filled the shelves with books that were mine, not inherited, not borrowed, but chosen. One Saturday morning, I invited my niece, Sarah, and her little girl, Emily, over for pancakes. The sound of a child's laughter bouncing off these walls was something I hadn't realized I'd missed until it returned. Emily darted from room to room, her tiny sneakers squeaking on the hardwood, leaving little echoes of joy behind her. As I poured more syrup on her plate, she looked up and said, "Aunt Margaret, your house is happy." I smiled because she was right. Houses can hold moods, and for too long this one had held my restraint. Now it held my breath again. One afternoon in early spring, I drove into town to see Linda. We met at the same cafe we'd been going to for years, the kind with chipped mugs and pie slices so big you needed a second fork. "You look different," she said as soon as I sat down. "Not younger exactly, lighter." "I think I've been carrying a backpack I didn't know I had," I told her, "and I finally took it off." She nodded, stirring her coffee. "That's the thing about taking your life back. It's not loud, it's just steady." We talked about the garden I planned to plant, the small guest room I was converting into a sewing space. Nothing grand, but everything mine. Victor hasn't called since the day he left. Trish sent a short note in the mail a month later, thanking me for handling things with civility. I read it twice, then tucked it into a drawer, not because I needed to keep it, but because some chapters deserve to be closed with a period, not a tear. I've learned not all endings come with a dramatic flourish. Some are quiet, barely audible, like the click of a door shutting behind you, and that's enough. Now, each morning, I wake up and walk barefoot across the wide plank floors to open the curtains. The view is the same, oaks stretching toward the sky, the gravel drive winding to the gate. But it feels different because I'm no longer living here on someone else's terms. Some nights, when the windows are open and the air is soft, I sit on the porch with a book and watch the fireflies blink across the yard. I think about how much of life is just this: the patience to wait, the courage to act when it's time, and the grace to carry on without bitterness. Charles once said the house should stay in the family. I realize now that family isn't just blood. It's the people who see you, who stand with you, who know your worth without needing a ledger or a last name. Last week, I hung a small wooden plaque in the front hall. Carved into it are the words, "This house runs on respect." It's the first thing anyone sees when they walk in. I don't need to explain it to visitors, and I don't need to defend it. It's a reminder, to them and to me, that walls and roofs can keep you dry, but it's dignity and kindness that make a home. On my birthday, Sarah brought a cake and a card signed in crayon by Emily. Inside the card was one simple sentence, written in Sarah's hand. "You taught me that quiet people can still own the room." I kept that one out. I know not everyone gets this kind of resolution. Some fights drag on. Some injustices never see a clean end. But I also know that even without the deed, the moment I decided I was done living as a guest in my own life, that's when I became free. Because in the end, it was never just about the house. It was about learning that the ground under my feet was mine long before I had the paper to prove it. The strongest walls I ever built weren't made of brick. They were made of finally believing I belonged,